Okay, welcome to tonight's class on information or fake news. I am Kara, the Adult Services Librarian at the Oregon Public Library in Oregon, Wisconsin. And tonight I am going to be your teacher. So I want to start this class with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. And it is, don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it. And of course, that's not a real quote from Abraham Lincoln. But it does look pretty good, doesn't it? The fact is that there can be really convincing information online that's just not accurate. You may wonder why people would create websites with misleading or wrong information. And unfortunately, there are a lot of reasons. But the biggest one is money. So clickbait. Clickbait is one way for people who run these websites to make money. So clickbait is text or a thumbnail that is designed to entice users to follow a link. So here I have two examples. These 12 impossible pet rescue stories will melt your heart. So this story makes you want to click because it's cute. And we all like cute animal stories, so that's a really cute picture too. The second story I have here is leading doctor reveals the #1 worst carb you're eating. And this story really draws on our fears and makes a sense of urgency because of the subject matter. I really want to know what carb I should not be eating. I mean, am I putting my health in danger by eating this? So it really intrigues the reader to make them want more. So there are examples of clickbait all over the internet and social media. And you might think, oh, well, what's the harm? The website's goal is to make money, not to relay information. So the stories may or may not be true, but the website will always make money through ad revenue. So that's something to keep in mind. So the rest of this presentation, I will go over how to evaluate online websites, or just websites, and things you can keep in mind when you are online. So consider the source, read beyond, check the author, look for supporting sources, check the date, check and see if it's a joke, check your biases, and then ask the experts. And so I'll be going through these one by one with some examples to keep in mind. So the first thing to do is to think about if you are familiar with the source. Have you heard of it before? Is the name of it similar to a reliable source? I found that sometimes the logo or the name of a website will look like a well-known source, but slightly different. So maybe the logo is red instead of maroon, or something like that. So this is a tactic to make you feel like you can trust the source. When you are looking at a resource, you can look at the URL, and if it's at edu or .gov, they're generally reliable websites. Because those URLs suggest that they're related or they're affiliated with education or government organizations. So not always, but usually information found from those pages are reliable. Also, when you're looking at the website and the URL, always check to see if the URL has been shortened. And so you can do that by hovering over the link. And then in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, it will show where the link is actually taking you. So shortened URLs happen because a lot of times the website can get really, 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 really long. And sometimes it's not for a malicious reason or anything like that to use a shortened URL, but just always be cautious because it can look like it's going to take you to the New York Times with a shortened URL, but it's actually taking you somewhere else. So this is a screenshot of a website for the National Report. And given the name and like the website layout, it looks professional. And National Report, I mean, that sounds like a good source. The headline here is not true. The headline is Dallas cancels Halloween amid Ebola concerns, and it just did not happen. This is an old screenshot, and thankfully the National Report website now indicates that they're satire, which is helpful. But at the time when I took the screenshot, a couple years ago maybe, it just said America's #1 independent news source. So it really seemed like it was, you know, a regular news site, but it was a satire website, like The Onion or any number of satire websites. Okay, so the next thing is to read beyond. So read beyond the headline. A headline is supposed to be attention grabbing and can be misleading on purpose. What is the actual story about? Then once you read the story, you can evaluate if the headline was actually representative of the information. Now, to read the article, you do have to click on it, which may perpetuate some of this clickbait money-making schemes. So if you're not entirely sure like what you're going to be clicking on or where you're going, you can just refrain from clicking on it. You could Google the headline, or use any of your preferred internet searches to search for more information about that topic without actually clicking on the clickbait. But I will go into a little bit more strategies about that in a little bit. So here I have an example. So PBS. I love PBS. Great organization. However, in this particular article, they did something a little clickbaity, which annoyed me, but I do generally trust PBS. So I clicked on it, and this was actually from my Facebook news feed. So the article headline is "These colorful dots will save your life." And I was like, okay, let me see about this. I'm not sure. And this took me to an article about the use of pesticides in the Bay Area. So city workers, after they put in chemicals to kill mosquitoes, they put this spray paint kind of like on the curb to indicate that this area had been treated. So yes, mosquitoes, there are mosquito-borne illnesses like malaria and the like, and West Nile. So when mosquitoes are killed, sure, there's like a lessened risk of West Nile, but like, is it really saving your life? It's a little bit misleading, this headline. The article was interesting, well written, and accurate, but this was a misleading headline. So I was a little disappointed in PBS for this one. Another thing you can do is check the author. So as you're doing your online research, always look for the author, because journalists are often freelance contractors and they want to have name recognition or be associated with their work. So if there is an article you find and there is not an author, you might want to wonder why a professional journalist wouldn't want to be associated with their work. So if an article does have an author attached to it, you can then do some more research and see what other articles this author has written. And so then that will give you an idea for the type of content that they usually produce. And it can help you evaluate the reliability of the article. So if, you know, if the author has written a ton of other articles on the Comedy Central website, you're like, okay, this is probably satire or comedy or something else. So checking the author can give you some insight into what type of article this might be. So here is my example here. South End residents evacuate town over super moon collision fears. And so this article was written by the chief reporter. So this is already kind of shady because it's a ridiculous headline. Like, that's just weird. And chief reporter, like, who's the chief reporter? That's not a name. That's it. It makes you feel like, oh, it's the chief reporter. This is reliable. I can believe this. But it's just made up. So take a look at that. Okay, supporting sources. Most legitimate sites will have a list of sources that support their claim. Fake news pages typically will not have sources for their stories, or if they do, the sources will link to other fake websites, or even in some cases will link to legitimate websites, but the link will be misrepresented. And so when you click on it and look at the actual page that it goes to, it's not relating anything to what you thought it would be. The bottom line is you need to look closely at the sources in addition to all of the other clues about the article. And so you need to be your own detective. So here is an example here. This article said that ramen noodles were linked to chronic inflammation, weight gain, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. And in the source at the very bottom of the page, it did link to reputable websites, Journal of Nutrition, Boston.com, which is a newspaper, and, you know, other articles too. And so it seemed like, oh, wow, this is a actual source that I can trust. But when you click on one of those links, it doesn't, in the sources that were cited, it's not an actual link. It just looks like it's a link, and it doesn't take you anywhere. And I did a little, followed up and looked up other things, and I looked at the table of contents of the Journal of Nutrition for August 2014, and there were no ramen noodle related content in that one. So the links were really misrepresented to make it seem like it supported the article, and it just didn't. Okay, so another thing to do is when you are researching a certain topic, the date can be a very important factor. So if you're searching for the newest, most recent information on diet and diabetes, like, you're really going to want the new content. But if you're searching for the history or a biography on Leonardo da Vinci, who lived in the 15th, 16th century, if my source is 20 years old, it, doesn't really make a difference, because it was already many moons ago. So when it comes to news articles, things can be shared over and over and over again. And sensational stories are often reshared because the clicks to those stories will make money. A story might very well be true, but it's from a few years ago. And so it is just being shared to make some more revenue. With the pandemic, this was somewhat more important because there may have been recommendations put out by the CDC or other health organizations that then were superseded. So it was really important to know, like, the date of the article and things like that. And then things were also repackaged and put out again by some of these fake news organizations to, again, really manipulate the reader and just make money off of it. So if you're ever unsure about an article, definitely do some research for similar stories and see if they are recent or if they are from several years ago. If all the articles that come up are old, then it's probably a recycled news story that was shared again simply to make money. And so I have an example of this on my next slide. So this is a photo of something that actually happened. This is a sort of iceberg that was created off a body of water. And it's crazy. It looks bizarro. But this photo was taken in 2013. So it is not current. But if you notice, looking at the views here down here, the views, there were 38 million views. So if this post had been monetized, it's fair to say that they made a big amount of money from that, just from the clicks. So something to keep in mind. So is it a joke? Something else to consider is if the article is a joke. There are lots of satire websites, and The Onion is the one I see the most on social media, but sometimes it's not always very clear if it's a satire or just a wild story from today. And it's not always very clear if it's satire. So before you believe something, always check the source and make sure it's not satire. I have checked the source a few times on actual news stories that it was too unbelievable. And I've also been duped and fooled a couple times by some satire. So the example here is the New Yorker has a satire columnist, the Borowitz Report, and they have since added the red text to indicate that the article is satire. So you can see satire from the Borowitz Report. But this was fairly new. A couple years ago, it just said the Borowitz Report. And if you weren't familiar with the satire Borowitz Report, you were like, oh my gosh, what? And I would just look at this and see, oh, the New Yorker. And then it was satire. And I was like, oh my gosh. So definitely check to see if it's a joke. Okay, this one is very tricky, and it is really hard to do. If you want to believe a story, always double and triple check the facts. It's really easy to like, oh, I saw an article that says this, but just because you saw an article doesn't mean it was a reliable article. And unreliable resources like the clickbait we saw on the third slide often play with your emotions, make you fearful, or reinforce things you already believe. And hackers do this too when they send you spam messages and say, you need to take action now. There's a warrant out for your arrest. That sense of urgency puts you in a panic. And then you just aren't thinking clearly because you're thinking, oh my gosh, the cops are going to come for me. I have to take care of this right away. Instead of taking a moment and thinking, okay, well, let's check and see if this is real. So these very emotional stories can do the same thing. So don't just click. If you feel that emotional appeal, then step back and really evaluate the content. And if a story is playing with your emotions, it very well may be on purpose. It may be working as intended. So really stop and think, okay, I'm getting very riled up by this. Let's pause and see if other sources are saying this as well. So here, this was pretty easy to find. Just some, clickbait and things like that. Whole Food is going to charge a cover at California stores. And, this reinforces what you think about California generally, oh, they're so bougie. And Whole Foods, like, oh, they're going to keep the riffraff out by charging a cover. Ugh. Well, no, that didn't happen. That's not a thing. And then, Target to discontinue the sale of holy Bibles. Like, how could they? What do you mean? And of course, the Bible is the best-selling book of all time. So, like, why would they do that? That doesn't really make sense. But to a certain person who, maybe has a dispute with Target or other things, may believe that. So these are all completely false, completely untrue, and are designed to to like inflame your senses. They're supposed to be inflammatory. So if you're uncertain about something, oh, and here, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong side here. But this is another example of something that is unreliable. This is something that I actually came across recently on Facebook again, and they were saying, do not use this appeal thing. It's unsafe. It doesn't wash off, and it just makes produce look fresh, but it's really rotten. And it's absolutely not true. So this was something I was like, what? Should I be concerned about this? And then when I did a little more research, I was like, no, that was completely made up. Okay. So if you ever have any questions about if something's reliable or not, if something you come across and you're confused by and you're not sure, like, is this real or is this satire? You can always contact the library and we can look into that. We can check our online resources and databases and see if there's something that is off about the story or direct you to a different source. We have resources like books and videos, and we also have peer-reviewed databases that have content in them from journals and magazines and valuable resources like that. So we're always here to help, and also do trainings like this. There are also places online that you can go, and there are a handful of fact-checking websites that you can go to and check and see. And I think the appeal example, I did actually go to Snopes to see if it was real, and it wasn't real. So so these are typically nonprofit organizations that do research on these sorts of claims all day, every day, and will provide you a balanced view of what the facts are. I know they have like different scales of if it's 100% true, if it's kind of true, if there's parts of it that are false, or if it's completely false. So one of the things I think is hardest is when something has a little bit of truth in it, but then it's been repackaged or made to be misleading. That can be a really tough thing to suss out. So the next slide here are the databases that we provide. We pay for to provide to our users for research purposes. So you're always welcome to use these for your everyday research. And then the state also provides you resources that you can use in your research. And we have an online encyclopedia with Britannica Library. We have all kinds of newspapers and reference resources. In 2013, there was a Pew report that showed that 77% of adults do online research for health information. And I would guess that in the past 10 years, that has gone up to nearly 100%. Because what's the first thing you do when your doctor says, you know, your blood sugars, your A1C is a little high? You're like, oh, well, what's that? Or, you know, your HDL went down. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's check out what that is. So through BadgerLink, we do have Consumer Health Complete, which is a resource where you can search health information. And it does come from reliable sources. There's like the Harvard Medical Review in there, and then also a variety of reference books with, you know, the basics of health things and all kinds of pamphlets and lots of materials. So, you know, instead of being like, oh, I have a headache, I must have brain cancer, from doing the WebMD search about your symptoms, you know, check with your medical professional, obviously. But you can also use more reliable resources. So BadgerLink, check it out. It's available to all Wisconsin residents. So it's already here. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. And I'm going to stop the recording in just a moment.